Welcome and thank you for joining the American Cinematheque Q&A for WOLFWALKERS. I'm Gwen Deglis, Deputy Director for the American Cinematheque, and I'd like to invite you to visit our website, americancinematheque.com, where you can find information on our upcoming programs and how to support the American Cinematheque by becoming a member and making a donation. I would like to thank Apple TV for this Q&A with filmmakers Tomm Moore and Ross Stewart. Moderating is filmmaker Guillermo del Toro. Enjoy.
Well, hello everyone, and I'm here with Tomm and Ross, and we would like to start the conversation. I would ask you as a favor, if you don't mind, that we introduce ourselves, give a capsule of who you are, what you did, and then we'll start discussing and chatting. So, Tomm.
Thank you very much. I'm Tomm Moore. I'm one of the co-founders of Cartoon Saloon. It's a studio here in Ireland, in Kilkenny in Ireland. We set up the studio about 20 years ago, and since then I've directed or co-directed 3 feature films, Secret of Kells, Song of the Sea, and now WOLFWALKERS.
I'm Ross Stewart. I was here when Cartoon Saloon started, I suppose, in Kilkenny immediately after college, but I've mostly been working in art direction, and only in the last maybe 10 years got more into directing shorts, and then WOLFWALKERS was the first feature that I got involved with.
And I'm Guillermo del Toro, and I was talking to the guys a little before we came in, and I was telling them we have a lot of commonality because I'm a quarter Irish and 50% animator. And on my mother's side, in the 1840s, a bunch of rowdy Irish guys came to fight on the side of Mexico, and they decided to mingle with the population
and stay.
That's so interesting. Those are the stories that right now I'm just fascinated by. I've been looking into so many weird and interesting connections where Irish people have popped up around the world and either contributed or hopefully contributed positively. But so interesting,
And Ireland is so small, Guillermo, that we might be related. You never know.
Probably we're more than likely related.
I tell you that my grandfather was Guillermo Gomez O'Culligan, and when we went to Dublin many years ago, I landed in Dublin, and I this is not trying to aggrandize. It was completely real. I felt A, I could live here. B, instantly we entered a pub and we were having a bite to eat, and in 10 minutes we were drinking and talking with the locals merrily and openly, and I felt at home. And as you may or may not know, Celtic design and lore has had a huge influence on work. I've been decorating my characters always with the Celtic signs. The mythology is incredibly influential for me. But the beautiful thing, and I want to start by talking about this, basically a decade has elapsed from the first movie to now. And I think Cartoon Saloon for me is a bastion in animation for me. Most of the industry is going, or has gone, except for television, has gone into 3D, into CG. And the interesting thing for me with Cartoon Saloon is that the lessons that have been learned from the craft, from the origins of the craft, passing through Richard Williams or passing through Paul Grimaud, these are things that you have inherited and protected. And in WOLFWALKERS, you have not only honed your sense of design, which we will talk about in a minute, but you have also fused the most simple or complex digital techniques in order to render what I think is a blessing. You still follow the rules of animation beautifully. It's extremely hard what you guys did, extremely hard. And we'll talk in detail, but to do what people now deem horribly 2D. It should have never been named.
I don't like this word 2D because it's not 2D. It's hand-drawn. it's a hand-drawn aesthetic, and it's an illustrative look, but it's not 2D. It's kind of playing with all the Ds that you possibly can, you know.
Well, the movie itself makes a point of absorbing. I see a lot of 40s, 50s illustration inherited in the way you illustrate and design, and you make it a point to make it no D. Like
Yeah.
the way one of the very interesting choices in the film is to make the human world exist in a flat plane, in a map-like plane. You know, you every time you see the town in a wide shot, it's basically flat. You know, and that represents the diagrammatic sort of repetition of shapes.
Yeah.
There's a clear choice in the movie to represent the human world by straight lines and the nature world by curves and circles. So, you know, right away you're playing with that, but then you do prodigious things. Like there's tracking shots in which the background is moving vertically and the character is advancing in a three-dimensional space. So talk a little bit about, evidently the purpose of the palette. The human world is cool, the natural world is warm. So talk formally about those choices if you can, a little bit.
First, I want to thank you for noticing and appreciating all those details. It means a lot.
We'll talk more about it. There's plenty to discuss.
Yeah, I think like when Tom and myself were coming up with the story, I think the visual developments, because we're both artists ourselves, so we're both very visually minded, and as soon as we start talking about a scene or an environment or anything, we'll start imagining it, and we have to get it down on paper. So I think as soon as the plot started to become clear, we started being aware that there was two very contrasting worlds. One of like Robin's cage, the Lord Protector's rules, this oppressive kind of authoritarian, construct of the town. And then this wild, free, instinctive world of the forest and the wolfwalkers. So really, we had to just use all of our visual language tools and techniques to try and reinforce those visually. So as you say, in the town, there's a lack of perspective. It's like a maze for Robin. She feels trapped. We show like the town always with a down shot. We try not to show any sky so that it always feels that Robin is like trapped by these walls and by these houses. And the fact that there's no perspective really shows that their worldview is very limited, you know. And then out in the forest, it's like a breath of fresh air. There's curves, there's like very deep canvases. It's like a whole contrasting world to that, and it's very wild and instinctive. And even the way that it's colored is very impressionistic. And you know, like there's huge areas of detail. There's like worlds to get lost in, even in the macro. And you know, it's really just to try and push those two worlds as far apart as possible visually.
Yes,
but also I think there was kind of a manifesto from the earliest days of the studio that we wanted to see what could still be done with hand-drawn that isn't really easily available in live action or CG, that there's something in hand-drawn that is the language of illustration, or there's a naturalness to not even the shape language, not even those decisions, but just how things are drawn. So that was maybe the most challenging thing. We didn't want it to become like strict. Like the town obviously lends itself to being strict because that's the worldview in there. And we wanted it to look like those woodblock prints from that time period, but we still wanted it to have some of the playfulness and some of those happy accidents that happen with handmade art. And so I suppose even in the forest, in the town, whatever rules we had, we didn't want them to be sort of mathematical, but rather something that looks natural. Like one of the concept artists we worked with, Cyril Pedrosa, I love his comic books, and it's why we asked him to work with us. And it just seems like handwriting. Like he'll do, you know, very blobby, almost painted ink for the character who's really engulfed in grief. And then when the character is very light and happy, the lines and everything completely change. And when you look at like Takahata's Princess Kaguya and those type of things, you can feel the artist's hand, how they draw the characters, never mind what the characters are doing, has an expressiveness in it. And that was kind of our little manifesto. Could we have the expressiveness of the best of kind of like comic book inking in the final line on screen?
Well, you make there are certain decisions that are made that are very conducive, like the coloring, so to speak, of the page, or the coloring of the environment. You have this beautiful sort of almost watercolory, diluted, fused colors, and then the detail layer on top of it is extremely Baroque. But because the color is washing over it, it really creates simple emotional impact. Whereas in the human world, it is much more confined. It's not that it's perfectly detailed, but it's more confined. What is also remarkable, and this is a detail that I was very happy to see, you know, when you see the town, however, you know exactly where you are. The top view of the town, you see the fortress of the where they're keeping the mother wolf, and you see the river going behind. You know that she's gonna come out of that window. When you see the top view, it makes sense. It's not just an arbitrary design. There is a thought process, and even when you go into a wide shot inside the layer, the claws protruding out of the ground, you know, the claw-like rock formation, create a circle in the eye, you know. But there's a decision there. This, to me, a movie works when the decisions that are done formally are narrative. When they are aesthetic, then that's eye candy. You know, I always call the other side eye protein because it's nurture.
High protein.
Yeah, and I think you guys do eye protein. What do I mean by that? When your decisions, for example, with the myth, because normally the myth is a male myth. The myth of the communion, it came originally from hunters or warriors or feral male myth, and then you take it and you make it this this figure with the mother and the figure of the healing and the spirit of the forest and this, and you imbue it with those round forms that are so difficult to do in animation. You know, when you move those characters, these are decisions that would look great in a piece of paper, but when you have to move them, you know, and so you're deciding from the get-go to go into and then you marry it to a form that is encompassing. Tell me a little bit how you came upon this.
I think the circle thing, it's almost become funny within the studio how much I use it, but it kind of goes back to I have tattoos of it, like the cup and ring markings that you find them on megalithic rocks. And I'm fascinated to find them in Native American art, but we always associate them. And then Ross is a fine art painter as well, and he's incorporated them into his paintings. So that kind of circle within a circle within a circle, and then the idea of Trinity and all, like those are all like just little ideas that you pick up from studying the Pictish art that even predates like the Book of Kells, and then trying, like you're saying, trying to bring that in as a visual motif, and then trying to give a structure to it so that it does, as you say, relates to trying to tell a story of a matriarchy versus a patriarchy, and trying to reinvent like it was early in the story development that we realized that Robin needed to be a girl, not a boy. And the whole story became much more interesting when we had this kind of these dual female leads, and how we could play with her going from being a kind of girl trying to be a boy, as it were, to being completely in herself and being able to do much more than she ever could in the town, being fully in her femininity in the forest with Maeve and with the wolves, you know.
And the more that we researched the whole Puritan background of Oliver Cromwell and all of that conquest, the more it became clear that it was an absolute patriarchy, and that like women were punished for even speaking out of turn, or if a woman acted a little bit like strange, they were immediately castigated as a witch and burnt. You know, there was absolutely no place that women had no agency, and they were treated almost like livestock or chattel a lot at that time. And so it became really apparent that with Robin as a little girl, that like her future that Bill had intended for her was no future at all. And really, when she meets Maeve and she sees her exact counterpart, a young girl living so freely and so instinctively and making her own choices and like digging in the dirt and not being told not to by anyone, it becomes much stronger then for her decisions, that either I live this life within a Puritan world where I'm being told what to do all the time, or else I live freely with the wolves and make my own decisions, you know.
Well, when you were talking also about the symbols earlier, I mean, the Celtic, the essence of the flowing spiral, you know, and the circles, and the flowing spiral, which is the essence of the universe, in a way, and is very wisely represented, I think, as the Western for me, in the East is the yin and the yang, and in the West is the spiral.
Yeah,
And
it's so fascinating. I saw recently a documentary on PBS about Native American kind of rock art and stuff, and it has the spiral in there as well, which I would have connected so strongly with like Newgrange and megalithic kind of monuments here in Ireland. But yeah, it's so fascinating that it's international, and I guess it has different. I guess it has slightly different meanings, but it must be some kind of like very primal. I mean, it's on your pan, your it's on your in your it's something primal and sort of mythic about it, and it means
there is
different things.
also,
Yeah.
I think it exists in nature. I mean, the golden measure is basically the spiral containing all
Yeah,
the.
shells and everything. Yeah, that's true.
I mean, I do believe in that. I mean, I believe in that at
Well,
the symbolic level for sure.
yeah, I really do think so. And I mean, I think in a lot of kind of like psychedelic art and stuff and dreamtime art and different kinds of shamanic, shamanic art, you do see a lot of these kind of symbols that, yeah, go back to nature and some kind of language that's in nature that feels pleasing to us on a subconscious level. I think when you're into those kind of shapes and language and stuff, you can't overthink it. It's a bit like music,
No, of
they
course.
feel right because they're part of an ancient, other small, like previous part of our brain before we started formalizing things. It was just a natural way to draw or
Or
whatever.
no, and it shows. I mean, the thing that first of all, I love the idea of you doing hand-drawn animation because there is a lot that is lost, a lot that is lost by relying or leaning on a technical device. I'll give you an example. For me, when I'm directing animation, which I have been doing actively since I started, but lately and the last 10 years, very purposely. And that's for me the way I want to lead my life. I want to evolve towards making this form of art, if I can make a difference as you guys do, making it, liberating it from the slavish idea that this is a genre,
Mm-hmm.
that this is for kids,
Wow.
and not
Yeah.
an art form that has been subjugated by the mainstream in a brutal way, and that right now we are in a moment of change because of the many things, including the pandemic. This is an art form that can come on its own
Yeah.
and,
Thank you
and
for saying that. Yeah,
become an
that's
adult medium of expression, which it has in the East and in sometimes in
yeah.
Europe. But we are always castigated by this idea. But what you do, and I'm sorry to chat a little, but I always, when I'm directing, I say I can see the figure moving, but it's not animated, because animation, in the very sense of the word, is to
So
confer a soul upon
mm,
something that you're breathing the breath of God. And that includes the traditional tricks of animation: compression, elasticity, fluidity, the wisdom of achieving only the necessary key poses, the moments of accident, blah blah blah, and everything is at play here. I really am fascinated by the fluidity of the wolf and wolf walker characters, how they move as a wave, as a mass, but it moves. They move with the hair. They move like a wave, and that is so beautiful. And it's a really gorgeous decision. Can only exist in that way when it's hand drawn.
I think so too. Yeah. I
Otherwise,
think
it's
that Yeah, I think that hand-drawn has that fluidity of form and tone that we could go from, fairly anatomically correct quadruped animation to the wolves moving just as a big mass. And we can move in and out of, like, there's a spectrum of stylization that's a little bit wider, I think, in hand-drawn that you can go up and down in. And it's when you see people like Takahata and, some of the European directors, like when you see Benjamin Renner's Ernest and Celestine and stuff, then you realize it is within animation, which is an art form and has a lot of different qualities in each medium within animation. Hand drawn, I think, is the most naturally fluid. It lends itself to being very fluid. And the more we kind of tighten up and get strict with it, the more we lose something, I think. And, and I actually see, like, I loved Into the Spider-Verse because I felt like this was a CG movie that was pushing towards the fluidity and the expressiveness of hand drawn. So it was really exciting to see that rather than just perpetually chasing realism, they were kind of coming back towards some of the hand-drawn aesthetic that we were kind of holding on to. So it's fascinating. Yeah.
that is what I find amazing about animation. To me, above all arts, it can achieve truth without realism. I think that the very nature of the art is to is an expression of truth, not seeking realism, but the illusion of that. And I think in your movie there are the way you cipher things helps that. I mean, there are decisions in animation and in shape. I mean, obviously the very phallic nature of the weapons
Hmm.
of the Lord Protector, the
Mhm.
cannons, the swords, the lances, blah, blah, and the idea of the fluid nature, movement and attack, and the circling of the wolves. Even when they attack, the wolves have a circle, create a circle. These are great decisions. How collective is your process, Ross and Tom, with the team, with the entire team of Salon Cartoon Salon? Do you do town hall meetings? Do you discuss it to see who brings the best ideas?
I think Tom himself wanted this film to be as collaborative as possible, because I think we were used to a much more kind of like formulaic pipeline in other films, and we're both getting on now. We're in our 40s, and we're a little bit like tired of our own style and our own ideas a little bit. In that, like we know exactly how we would draw a character, how we would frame a shot. So we've been really like positive towards like people coming from colleges with loads of motivation and enthusiasm and ideas and all that energy that brings. So we really wanted to, I don't know, to be very, very open to all kinds of like suggestion. And so even though Tom himself had a very clear idea of the visual language of the movie, every department was open to suggesting things, and we kind of encouraged each person to, you know, to suggest things about their own scene, their own background, their own animation, and we were open to taking in all those ideas. And even though that might have meant that each artist had a little bit more work to do before the deadline, I think they brought that enthusiasm because they felt they were listened to with their ideas, you know.
Yes.
So it was a very collaborative process.
Like we've seen your sketchbooks and stuff, and Guillermo, and we do that. Ross and I have always done that, like where we try and do thumbnails across the whole script even before storyboarding starts, just to get down how we would do it, so we have something to start with. But what's been really lovely, and I think what's loosened up the most over the years in the studio, is we've got a bigger and bigger team of people we trust, and a lovely mix of, as Ross says, young people who came straight from college, like our co-art director Maria Pareja, Federico Pervana, who helped with the characters. They came straight from college with all that enthusiasm that we had 20 years ago, and they would take ideas we had and go way further with it. Same with the storyboard team. There was story ideas being kicked around even after the last script was approved, because the story team were all like coming at it as filmmakers. And by now the studio is so lucky because we have someone like Luis Bagnall, who directed a short film that was Oscar nominated, storyboarding on our movie. So we would be foolish not to let them bring their experience and passion, and it only makes us look good in the end that everybody gets to feel like a filmmaker, you know. So we try and keep that door open as much as we can.
Well, I think that gives that feeds everything it nurtures everything in a better way. Everybody becomes an owner
Yeah,
of the
a
film.
filmmaker, co-filmmaker. Yeah.
And when I'm directing on Pinocchio, for example, we, unless it's absolutely necessary, we avoided face printing, because I said I don't want any decision taken by a machine or by a series of poses. I want the decision to come from the connection between the animator and the puppet. And when I'm
Yeah.
directing, I tell the animator, this is what I think. Now, what do you think? What do you think the character is thinking at this moment? Okay,
There's such huge,
show
in
me what.
stop motion, even more so, I think, than hand drawn.
Oh,
There's such
connect.
huge contribution that comes from the animators that they have to, and it's their work that you see on screen. Yeah, I think that's really important. I think what Ross and I sort of had was a telescope kind of approach, where we started very broad when we were working with Will, the screenwriter, and then it narrowed and narrowed as we went along. But it's fascinating how at each stage, everyone in whatever department it was, even if it was like ink and paint, coloring the characters, they did have something to contribute and something to bring, and it always kept the process lively and you know, a lot of discussion, a lot of experimentation. And I loved on this project in particular that because we were co-directing, I got to animate a little bit more. I got to try and get a bit better at cleanup animation, and it felt like I was in the trenches a little bit more with everybody. So I really appreciated how hard what we were asking people to do was. And I really appreciated the fact that it's their drawings that were ending up on screen. So no matter, you know, what we had in mind, we have to work with what they're bringing. So I mean,
you even got a retake from the animation supervisor, didn't you?
yeah, and
Really?
that was good. That was good. No, that's
Yeah.
good. I think that's
And the
good.
same,
That's what I wanted.
same for me. Like I did some backgrounds, and then Maria Perea gave me some corrections and stuff. So it makes you feel humble, you know. It makes
No,
you
but it's
feel
also
like
good because
on
it
the
keeps
same
that
level. It's good.
workshop. I think that workshop feeling,
Yeah.
that kind of art school feeling, is what keeps me wanting to keep going. If I thought I knew it all and I just needed like hundreds of robots to do what I told them, I
Yeah.
wouldn't be interested anymore. It's the
Yeah.
collaborative nature that makes me feel animation is so special, you know.
Well,
And especially in Cartoon Saloon, sorry, but the note that you mentioned earlier, Guillermo, about like how animation has a kind of an expressive fine arts quality, I think is because each drawing is an expressive, it should work, you know, as a single frame. So if you have a succession of those single frames moving, then they're all going to have that expressive fine art quality to it. And we're so lucky in that Cartoon Saloon, you have printmakers, you have illustrators, you have like amazing people at life drawing, even sculptors. You have people who are amazing at all kinds of crafts, and it's probably the same in the studio where you're making Pinocchio too, in that they're all artisans and they're all artists, so they're all able to imbue their own profession, their own like private art form into the professional then too. You know, they can all bring something extra to it.
well, the thing is, the one thing that is beautiful is, I think, if the nature of life is flow, which is what we were discussing, the more you make your creativity and the creativity of everyone flow together, the more the film grows. I mean, when you stifle that, you know, and I'm sad that this is so short. I would like to talk about the political dimensions of the film and how you address them obliquely, which is very wise, rather than approach them frontally, and many other things. One of the things that I want to discuss before we open to the audience, I think there's a thing I pursue in my projects, and I pursue it on Pinocchio, where I say, show me the unnecessary act. I say, show me the things that should not be animated. Somebody scratching an itch, somebody trying to grab a glass and failing, and then grabbing it at the second or third try. Somebody, because what dooms animation for me is the coding of the pantomime that comes from California, not to pinpoint it to anywhere, that comes from where characters have an excessive amount of key poses. They're all suburban, modern key poses, you know, that are really identifiable with the market that they're trying to access, and they overdo it. And there is a moment of the beauty of animation is sometimes growing quiet, sometimes growing quiet through 2 or 3 interstitial moments that are not necessary for an achieving of a key pose, blah blah blah. But look, I'm seeing a lot of questions.
Oh man, I wish I could talk to you for days about this stuff. I think,
this could
especially because you're still in the trenches of an animated production, so I'm sure you're like facing so many of these things right now.
Okay, but you know what I like about what I see is that, and I cannot also let go of this without talking about it, is I think the evolution of your studio is remarkable. You know, in a very short time, the evolution of what you were trying to do and what you're doing is incredibly high. This is, in my opinion, the most complete movie in many ways. But then when you track it, you can see what you learn in each movie, what Nora brought on Breadwinner, you know, just a fabulous.
She brought a huge amount to WOLFWALKERS as well, because we were lucky that we were developing WOLFWALKERS while she was working on Breadwinner. I did some storyboards and designs on Breadwinner, most of which Nora ended up not. where we had a dialogue where I felt we were all learning at the same time. And yeah, it's a story of a studio growing up, which is kind of exciting to look back on. I don't think you could plan it, but we've been really lucky in a lot of way with the talented people that wanted to come and work with us, you know.
But to me, and please, if you guys can start sending the questions through the chat. But to me, this is a moment in which I really believe a whole generation of animators can grab this moment and start changing the art form. And
So.
we have been driven to a ghetto of age by a merciless industry, by a merciless corporation-minded industry, which has to end. It has to end because the audience is ready.
Yes.
Change. The audience wants it, and it's a very humble comparison. But in the way that children's literature gave way to young adult, the people want this, and we are in the moment, and it's not going to be us maybe, but the next generation.
Yeah,
we got to give them the tools and the goals and the hopes that they can change this. So I'm going to go to the audience questions now. There's so many. I'm going to just choose a few.
I really think that baton passing thing is the most important thing, that you feel like you're just one, like storytellers, like we come from an oral storytelling tradition where each story wasn't written down but just told and repeated, and I feel like that in animation at the moment. I'm so excited to see what's coming next, and I'm so happy to have been the person who could take the baton from before and pass it to the next, you know.
Well, if we talk about flow, it's about continuity. It's not about you, it's about who comes after you. Really, we're all gonna go in a blink of an eye, all of us, gonna be gone. We count as a note in a symphony. So let's make sure that the next note can get it easier. But there is a great question here. There's a great question that I agree with. Second greatest sin on animation, voice talent. Terrible. Most of the time, again, it's as bad as the pantomime, you know? And a question from Valeria Guzman says, the voices in this film are amazing. You feel every emotion. How did you find the right direction and the balance between emotion of the characters and expressing it through their voice? So.
You go for it, Ross.
Well, I think the most eye-opening experience for me anyway, and I think for Tomm too, was the two girls. Really, Robin and Maeve are like the heart of the movie, and for us it was like taking Honor Neefsey, who had been in many professional roles and like, you know, is a professionally trained actress, and then Eva Whittaker, who had just done school drama, and putting them together in a live recording studio where there's just loads of adults doing their adult thing, and these two little girls had like a couple of days in the recording to form a bond and form a friendship. And I think we captured some of that in the actual recording. Like, they were playing off each other, you know, and doing all those scenes. And because they were actually becoming friends at the same time as they were doing these scenes where they were becoming friends as characters, I think we managed to capture that little spark.
Yeah.
So, you know, like other animated movies, the actors record separately in separate countries or counties or whatever in little booths, and I think there's something so beautiful about like live recording in a studio like that, playing off each other. So I think that was a huge part.
That was it. Like, we had like someone like Sean Bean or Simon McBurney, these amazing, you know, experienced character actors working opposite against like Ava, who was like 9 years old, and she held her own, and it was so beautiful to watch. And I think casting, whether it's casting the right animator for a scene or the right actor for a voice part, is so much of it. And then once you have the right people, you can really just sort of let it play and you know, let them bring something to it as well. Definitely really enjoyed. There was one sequence I really enjoyed with the voice acting. I mean, Ava was amazing, but there was one scene where Honor had to be impersonating Dad. Like, so it was like Robin talking to a hat that was, imagine your dad. And what was so fun was that she's actually from Cambridge, so she doesn't have absolutely perfect Sheffield accent like Sean Bean. So he would correct her now. So she was standing in front of Sean Bean in a room full of people watching her doing an impersonation of Sean Bean, which was the one thing we were all terrified of doing, because the minute you see him, everyone wants to go, winter is coming, and say all these classic lines, but he just can't, you know. But she was doing it, and we were all sitting there, and it was really magic, and it was really lovely that he would he was very like down to earth and humble about it. He would even say the line so that she could kind of do her exaggerated impersonation of him. So those kind of moments, they're just fun, and it's so lovely because animation is a long process. But
Yeah.
those few weeks of recording, I'm sure you know yourself, those few weeks of recording kind of give a little spark that lights the whole, you know, the whole flame for the rest of the production.
100%. And it says from Polly here, says another tiny question, again, Mexican fan, and to the animator here. Could you tell us what kind of references, and this is very important, I think, if you can talk about animators or illustrators or anything, people you follow, did you use for the world building and character animation and design?
So many.
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
think the problem is to do a unique style or to do something original, you nearly need to have so many influences that they disappear. Otherwise, you just become a copy of somebody.
Course.
But like you know, the 101 Dalmatians, we loved you could feel the artist's hand still on screen in that era of
Yeah.
yeah, those Xerox movies. And then for the character animation, we did actually acting workshops with some local actors and stuff. And we had amazing animators like James Baxter and Aaron Blaze, who were like total experts from the Disney Renaissance, give lectures on how to act with quadrupeds. But I think we were always looking to try and find, like you say, find a line that didn't look like that sort of copy of a copy of a copy that you see sometimes in animation, where people are just trying to be as good as Milt Kahl, and they were able to find something that was their own, you know.
Yeah, I think like if you look at the inspiration folders that we had during the production of WOLFWALKERS, it's just they're endless, you know, and you'll find like printmakers and sculptures and graphic novels and then film
Mike
reference.
Mignola and Glenn
Everyone
Keane,
is in there.
like yeah, we'd have like a line test from Glenn Keane and then a Mike Mignola comic book page, and
Of course.
trying to, you know, stir it all up. So
No, what is interesting for me, if you can quote them, because I think that the more there's a quote, I think it was Noam Chomsky, I'm not sure, that says the limit of your language is the limit of your universe, and the same is true about visual language. And the more you can, for example, when we were talking about Pacific Rim with the team, I would bring Boccioni, which is an Italian futurist sculptor, or Goya, the giant painting. I wouldn't go, oh, let's look at Mazinger, or let's look at the last thing we quoted were other robots. We were talking about other influences. And I think the beauty of your stuff, if you can name a couple of illustrations or illustrators, it would be delightful.
Well, Cyril Pedrosa was obviously huge.
Yeah.
I mean, and we were lucky enough to get Cyril to do concept art with us, which was fantastic. We wouldn't have been able to do that on previous films. And then Emily Hughes is worth a big shout out too, because Emily Hughes made this book called Wild, which is a little children's book, but it's so beautiful, and it encaptures that whole energy and wildness that exists in the forest. And we were lucky then to get Emily to do some concepts for us too.
Do you remember the name of that watercolor painter? He painted like English landscapes that we had loads of images in the folder.
Rollins, I think is his name.
Yeah.
And I can't remember his first name.
They were beautiful, kind of posterized watercolors. Our problem is sometimes, that the influence folder will have these beautiful images that we're pointing to, and we don't always give them the credit. Day by day, we forget their names. But that was huge. But I think like Adrian Merigeau, who was art director on Song of the Sea, and worked with Ross as a background artist on Secret of Kells, he brought something amazing to me, because he pointed out where I was looking at these megalithic carvings and this Pictish art on rocks and stuff, he was saying, but that's like Miro, or, you know, that's like, you know, Kandinsky or something. He was finding these like modern art references that were drawing on the same kind of symbolism. So those kind of are more left of field that you mightn't think of, but those are also stuff that we've kind of absorbed into the style. And folk art, I mean, there's not much credits in folk art, but we have a big folder of that kind of a beautiful, naive clarity, where somebody never taught somebody how to not draw like a child. So they just became more and more sophisticated at that beautiful, almost symbolic or diagrammatic way of drawing. And that's something that we were always looking at as well, because they're so clear and they tell stories so crisply and clearly, you know.
And we have time for one final question. I mean, I would love for this to be 3, 4, 5 hours and have lunch.
I felt like we were just warming up.
Yeah. This is ridiculously short. But one more question. It says here is from Jamie Ding, and it says, was Robin Goodfellow's name an intentional reference to Midsummer's Night Dream?
Yeah, and more so because I think there's Robin Goodfellow as a notion, as a character, goes back to the Green Man, the Laughter in the Woods. That sort of, we wanted an English folklore equivalent to Maeve MacTira, our kind of Irish, you know, fairy character. We thought it was good to have an English equivalent, you know.
Well, listen, I could go on and on there. I think the time is getting to a close. I'm very happy it happened today because St. Valentine's was the Christian way, the Catholic way to try to suppress Lupercalia, which was the feast of the wolf. It happened
Wow,
the 15th of February, you
that's
know, so it's
beautiful.
very
Didn't know that.
appropriate.
Mhm.
I think that we have kindred spirits. I can see it in your work. I can see it in the way you think. It is always an honor for me to talk with artists that have not only craft but principle, and that know where they come from, uh, embrace the traditions, embrace the history of their craft, and bring it to a new place so it can move into the future. And that's what your movie and your craft do. And I want to thank you in the name of however many people showed up.
Thank
And
you, everyone, and
you in
thank
the
you so
future.
much. Yeah, means a
Thank,
lot. Like, we're huge fans of your work, so it's been a real honor to chat to you today.
Thank you
until
very much.
and
Thank
we'll meet physically and have dinner.
Yeah, yeah, look forward to it.
Thank
right.
you so much, Guillermo, Tom, Ross, for this amazing conversation. Guillermo, we will invite you again with Tom and Ross for a longer conversation, part 2, because there's so much more to talk about. I want to thank the audience. I want to remind you that if you have not seen Wolfwalkers, it's available through our website. Watch it, delight in it, and spread the words. And join us tonight for a conversation about On the Rocks with Sofia Coppola, Bill Murray, Jim Jarmusch. Guillermo, you want to say something?
Yeah, only one thing. This is a very good note you're saying. If you guys want this type of movies, talk about these movies. Don't just like them and keep them private. Tell everyone and anyone that can listen so that they can be in the conversation culturally, awards wise, artistically. If you like these movies, talk about these movies because the rest have a huge apparatus of promotion and acceptance. These are changing movies, movies looking for a change. Talk about them, please.